These are really interesting years and very informative years too. The people that I'll meet will be contacts that I'll have the rest of my life, and a few of them had a really huge impact on me. It was a dream job. I had all the latest records right at my fingertips. My own people were listening to me on the radio at least 3 days a week, and I was making pretty good money. And that was a big thing with me. I always wanted to be able to support myself. I knew that I didn't want to have to ask my parents for money, for dances, for anything, although they would have been glad to help me out, but I wanted to be independent, and this job really allowed me to do that. And this is how stupid I am. I didn't know that I could buy my own car until one day my dad said, you know, you've got all this money in the bank account. Why don't you buy your own car? And I was like, Suddenly I became White Fang from Soupy Sales. There were a couple of guys. One was Greg Rice and the other was Pete Stone. Now Greg Rice was from Sarasota, Florida, and he was going to Mercer University and working at the Big X part-time just like I was. Pete Stone was the other guy. He eventually would get me down to Valdosta where I would go to college, and that market had an amazing effect on me. And Terry Taylor. Don't forget the name Terry Taylor. It's important. Radio as it exists today, at least here in America, it would be almost impossible for an Allman Brothers band to be discovered. We were their local station, WNEX. I mean, the brothers knew where we were. Bobby Wallace was the guy that was the liaison between the company and us, made sure we had the record, the product. We broke every Allman Brothers song that came out, and as a result, the station was lined with gold records. Not really the station itself, the lobby. Yeah. And this couldn't happen today because most radio stations have brand managers, which means that one guy in the company decides what every radio station that this company owns in that format is going to play. So, for instance, the station that the Allman Brothers would be on, album-oriented rock or rock and roll or classic rock. They'd have one guy that would decide. Now, let's say the Allman Brothers in Macon come out, and then the Atlanta Rhythm section up in Atlanta, and they were all supported by their local radio stations. And then disc jockeys would call other disc jockeys, hey, what are you playing? What's trending? What's hot? Something like Billboard would pick up on it, which was the national charts that everybody would follow. And if they got enough action, reaction, and talk among disc jockeys and radio stations, suddenly you got yourself a national hit. In a small respect, WNEX was an integral part of this because guys like Phil Walden that owned Capricorn would say, hey, we're charting on WNEX. And he'd call a station in Atlanta and say, hey, they're playing the hell out of this at the Big X down here. And Quixie would say, well, okay, yeah, maybe so. He'd call Chicago, Detroit, New York and say, hey, we got the whole Southeast listening to the Allman Brothers band. And then all of a sudden, it starts popping up all over the country. It was just a constant communication. We didn't have the internet. We had nothing but charts and a telephone. And it worked. And a tip of the hat to Terry Taylor, our music director, who made sure that a lot of local bands and a lot of groups, some that made it and some that didn't, but he made sure they had an avenue to be heard on the Big X. We wanted to support our local musicians because Macon is a music town, and we were proud to be the one that did that. Jimi Hendrix played at the Byron Pop Festival just down the road. I just started at WNEX. I'd just been fired from MAZ, and then a few months went by, and here it was, the summer, and all of a sudden I get reports of all of these naked people in Byron, and it was like a Woodstock 2, and I'm going, once the Allman Brothers started getting momentum, the next band that Capricorn supported was the Marshall Tucker Band, followed by Wet Willie, and then it just grew from there. I was on the air the night Dwayne Allman was killed in a motorcycle accident. Joe Ferry, our news director, called me and said, Bill, I've got bad news, and I was the one that delivered it to the mid-state. 17 years old. I was 17. I was filled with so much energy for radio. I remember I'd do a 5-hour remote at an appliance store somewhere, get off the air, have an hour and a half to eat, and then be back on the air from 6 until midnight to pull my shift. And the next day I'd be back at noon to work another 6-hour shift. It was crazy, but it was more fun. I can't say enough great things about what happened at WNEX because it really did set the pace. I mean, here it was kind of ironic. They had done this little article about me being such a young disc jockey and working at WMAZ, and then I got fired a couple of months later. Then they came back to do another article with me at WNEX as a teenage disc jockey broadcasting to teenagers. I almost didn't let them do it because I said, wait a minute, the last article didn't go so well. Oh yeah, there I am, little teenage disc jockey at the board at WNEX. Look at those airline pilot headphones. That's what we used back then. Macon Youth plays disc for local radio station. Well, that pretty well is a job description right there. My first experience in radio was really a great one, but didn't end as well as I would have liked for it to. But here I was at the Big X, and I really found myself. Thanks be to everything that goes on with the universe. That there were people there that were able to teach me, that I could learn from, and I was able to sort of experiment on my own. There were epic things that happened, and it couldn't have been a better experience for me. I was hooked. This was my career, and I wasn't going to do anything else. On our next visit, I began working at what we called the Super V. I know, WVLD. I always thought Super V kind of sounded either like hemorrhoid medicine or some kind of bad department store.